The Gardener Kings. During the Dawn Age, the world of ice and fire was gripped by the Long Night, which was a devastating period in which millions of lives were lost. In this horrific period, the Great Other and his undead armies rampaged the realms of men, and it's only after all men united that they were able to turn the tide. Garth Greenhand's grandsons, Brandon the Builder and Lan the Clever, were among the most important combatants during this dark time, and they helped men everywhere to win the war for the Dawn. Though Garth Greenhand probably died in this period, many of his grandchildren survived, and they went on to reclaim their lands. The Gardeners of Highgarden were some of those that survived, and they went on to reclaim their kingdom of the Mander. Like in all the lands the first men conquered, conflicts were common in the Reach over the great bounties it offered. Though these conflicts were long and brutal, the Gardeners of Highgarden were eventually victorious, mainly due to the fact that most houses in the Reach hailed the Gardeners' claim of being the eldest descendants of Garth Greenhand. In this, the Gardeners held all the symbols of power and legitimacy that proved that they were the rightful heirs of Garth Greenhand. Of all their many symbols of legitimacy, the Oaken Sit was by far the most important heirloom the Gardeners held, for it was a living throne planted in Highgarden by Garth Greenhand himself during the Dawn Age. This made the Gardener Kings the High Kings of the Reach, in name but not in practice, and most of the other petty kings of the Reach looked to them for guidance. But not all the kings in the Reach saw the Gardener Kings as superior. For instance, the High Tower Kings of the Kingdom of Oldtown were far more richer than the so-called High Kings of the Reach, and they therefore did not see the need to pay tribute to the Gardener Kings. Most Gardener Kings took this as an insult, but none more so than King Giles the First, who attacked Oldtown, sacked the city, and sold 3/4 of its population into slavery. For these actions, King Giles is remembered as the foe, but though he was successful in destroying Oldtown, he was unable to take the High Tower itself, due to the formidable defenses of the Black Fortress at its base. Despite the supremacy of the Gardeners along the banks of the Mander, they were not invulnerable, for the Ironborn threatened their realm for several centuries. The Ironborn would raid along the Mander, killing thousands of men and carrying off riches and women. Though the Gardener Kings fought these reavers, 6 kings lost their lives fighting the Ironborn, and these barbaric reavers were often the victors of these brutal conflicts. One of the most devastating conflicts between the people of the Mander and the Ironborn was the war for the Misty Islands, which had been a part of the kingdom of the Mander for centuries, but it was taken by the Ironborn reavers, after which they killed all the men they found on the Misty Islands and took all the women as salt wives. In order to gain victory over the reavers, the Gardener Kings had to first unite the whole of the Reach, and that was mostly achieved through diplomacy, not war. For instance, King Garth III, dubbed as Garth the Great, subdued his old cousins, the Oakhearts of Old Oak, the Cranes of Red Lake, and the Rowans of Golden Grove, with pacts of friendship and marriage. Centuries later, King Merrin III claimed the Arbor as his own, after the last king of the Arbor, who had been Merrin's cousin, was lost at sea without having sired sons of his own. Garland II, remembered as Garland the Bridegroom, set aside his wives and married the daughter of King Lymond Hightower, and King Lymond, who was dubbed as the Sea Lion, married King Garland's daughter in turn and bent the knee to the Gardener Kings. Later on, Gwaine III, or Gwaine the Fat, ended the disputes between the Peaks and the Manderleys by passing judgment on their conflicts and claiming their fealty without bloodshed. John II, who is remembered as John the Tall, subdued all the petty kings that had ruled along the Mander, and the green hand banners of the Gardeners would thereafter stand undisputed over the River Mander from its headwaters to its mouth on the Sunset Sea. The Reach would be fully unified during the great reign of King Garth V Gardener. In his youth, Garth V turned back the invasion of King Ferrus Fowler and his army that consisted of 10,000 men. After this great victory, the Tarley kings that had ruled over the kingdom of the Western Marches bent the knee to Garth, which finally brought the entire Reach under the rule of the Oaken Sit. Garth V would thereafter be called the Hummer of the Dornish, but his greatness did not stop there. With the power of the Reach firmly behind him, King Garth the Hummer sailed to the Misty Islands and expelled the Ironborn that had ruled there for centuries. King Garth would then repopulate the islands with the first men of the Reach, and he renamed the islands as the Shield Islands. In his old age, King Garth V defeated the Grand Alliance of a King of the Rock and a Storm King at the Battle of the Three Armies, for these two kings had wished to curve up the Reach between themselves. After this great victory, King Garth married his daughters to the heirs of the King of the Rock and the Storm King that had died trying to conquer his realm. Garth V is remembered as a great warrior, but his greatest achievement was his mostly peaceful and prosperous 81-year rule over the Reach. And because of this, he is also remembered as the Golden Hand, and his long rule is remembered as the Golden Reign. This golden age in the Reach would continue for another millennia after Garth the Golden Hand's death. However, it was threatened by the coming of the Andals. Though the Andals were late to arrive in the Reach, they would eventually migrate there, for they were attracted to the vast wealth that would be attained if the Reach were conquered. The greatest advantage the Gardener Kings had over the Andals was that they were aware of the Andal arrival in Westeros, as before the Andal Knights tried to take over the Reach, they had already subdued the Vale, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands. This gave the kings of the Reach vital information about the strengths and weaknesses of the Andals. Unlike some Firstmen kings that had allied themselves with the Andals to fight local rivals, the Gardeners avoided that mistake, and instead some of them sought out ancient alliances in order to stop the Andal invaders. For instance, King Gwaine IV, called the Gods Fearing, sought out the Children of the Forest so that the Greenseers could stop the Andal invaders, but whether he was successful or not is not recorded. King Mern II decided to strengthen his defenses by building a new curtain wall around Highgarden, and he ordered his bannermen to strengthen their own castles. Mern's grandson, Mern III, called the Mudling, stupidly hired the services of a woods witch who claimed that she could raise armies of the dead that could defeat the Andals. However, the battles of conquest that the Firstmen of the Reach had dreaded never came due to the diplomatic approach that was employed by three Gardener kings. King Garth the Ninth Gardener bought a septon to Highgarden, made him one of his counselors, and even built a sept at Highgarden, though he never stopped worshipping the old gods. His son Mel I, dubbed Mel the Meek, was the first Gardener king to formally worship the Seven, marry an Andal princess, and he also funded the construction of septs and mother houses across the Reach. Mel's son, Gwaine V, was the first Gardener king born into the faith of the Seven, and he was the first ever to be knighted. And like his father before him, Gwaine V took an Andal princess to wife, and like his father and grandfather before him, King Gwaine bought Andal knights into his court. Sir Alistair Tyrell was the foremost Andal knight to serve King Gwaine, and Gwaine would make Sir Alistair his champion and sworn shield. Sir Alistair's son, Garth Tyrell, would become the first High Steward of Highgarden, and this position would be granted to the Tyrells thereafter. Under Garth IX, Mel I, and Gwaine V, the most powerful Andal warlords were granted lands in return for their fealty. The most skilled Andals were also sought after by these three Gardener kings as well, and they encouraged their bannermen to do the same. For example, Andal ironsmiths were highly sought after, for they taught the Firstmen how to make iron weapons. The strategy of Garth IX, Mel I, and Gwaine V would prove to have been wise, for most Andal settlers in the Reach assimilated quickly, and most of them would even fight their fellow Andal settlers that forswore their oaths to Highgarden. Though peace between the Firstmen and the Andals would remain thereafter, turmoil would return to the Reach over the centuries after the Andal settlement in the Reach. Invasions from the Westermen, the Dornish, Stormlanders, and Rivermen were common, and at times the Gardener kings were the instigators of these conflicts, as it was seen with King Giles, the third Gardener, who without provocation attacked the Stormlands with a powerful army, destroyed the Stormlands' forces, and annexed all the lands north of the Rainwood to the Reach. with Storm's End the only castle that defied him for 2 long years. However, King Giles was forced to abandon his siege of Storm's End when news reached him that a king of the Rock, 3 Dornish kings, and 2 Riverland warlords had all attacked the Reach in order to gain new territory, or raid it, in his absence. Though the army of the Reach was able to defeat all of its enemies, the Reach itself was devastated, as King Giles died of the bloody flax, and all the territory he had conquered in the Stormlands was lost. King Giles's infant son, Garth X, succeeded Giles after his death. Though Garth X's reign lasted for 89 years, it was during his rule that the power of Highgarden diminished. Garth X was a vain and unintelligent king who surrounded himself with sycophants and fools that heaped praises on him. In his old age, King Garth became entirely imbecilic, and opportunistic lords sought to take advantage of this in order to gain wealth and power. Throughout King Garth's long reign, he had never sired a son of his own, and his many daughters stood as his true heirs. Powerful lords sought to take advantage of this situation, but none more so than the Peakes and the Manderleys. A Lord Peake married one of King Garth X's many daughters, and a Lord Manderley married another, and both men were determined that their respective wives would inherit the Oakensit after the death of their father. This conflict led to a civil war, as the lords of the Reach had to choose between one of these 2 great houses. Unfortunately for the Reach, its neighbors took advantage of its civil war and decided to invade it. The war that followed was the most catastrophic conflict the Reach had faced since King Garth the Golden Hand had unified the Reach some 3,000 years earlier. In this conflict, a Storm King and a King of the Rock invaded the Reach, and they each conquered large parts of it. Worse still was the Grand Alliance of the Torrentine and Stone and Sky kingdoms that brought devastating ruin to the Reach. In this, the Torrentine army besieged and burnt Oldtown, while the Stone and Sky army attacked Highgarden. The Fowlers desecrated Highgarden, for they cut down and burned the ancient oaken sit that had been planted by Garth Greenhand, and had been the pride of House Gardner for near 6,000 years. However, the Fowlers were shocked to find the senile Garth X abandoned in his bedchamber, where he had been tied on his bed by his own men, and he was covered in his own excrement. The Dornish cut his throat as an act of mercy, sucked Highgarden, and then set it to the torch. What followed was 10 years of turmoil in the Reach that was only ended when Sir Osmond Tyrell, the High Steward of the Reach, united several houses in the Reach, and together they ended the war between the Peakes and the Manderleys. Sir Osmond would then reclaim the ruined castle of Highgarden, and he crowned King Garth X's second cousin, Mern Gardner, as the new king of the Reach. Though Sir Osmond soon died of old age, his son, Sir Robert Tyrell, inherited the position of High Steward, in which he gave sage advice to King Mern VI. King Mern was so grateful of Sir Robert's service that he granted him the hand of one of his daughters in marriage, thus joining House Gardner and House Tyrell in marriage for the first time, and the 2 houses would join in matrimony 9 more times in the future. When Sir Robert died, his son, Laurent, became the High Steward of Highgarden. These 3 men helped King Mern VI to rebuild Highgarden, govern the Reach, and restore the pride of House Gardner. Mern VI's son, Garth XI, went a step further than his late father, as he brought such a horrific vengeance to Dorne that the Stone and Sky and Torrentine kingdoms were left devastated. So many people in these kingdoms were butchered by King Garth's armies that Garth XI would be dubbed as the Painter, after a Lord Hightower claimed the Red Mountains were green before King Garth painted them with the blood of Torrentine and Stone and Sky citizens. King Garth the Painter would also reclaim all the territory of the Reach that had been lost to the Stormlands and the Westerlands. King Garth had a long reign that brought the Reach back to its prominence and power. The Reach would have a long peace after his death, but a millennia before Aegon's conquest of Westeros, political strife would once again threaten the stability of the Reach. This happened under the reign of King Percean III Gardner, who had grown jealous of the power and wealth that was held by the Manderleys of Dunstonbury. Many High Lords of the Reach had even turned to Lord Manderley for their complaints, which had effectively usurped the authority of Highgarden. Feeling threatened by this, King Persin turned to the Peaks, who were the historical enemies of the Manderleys, in order to destroy House Manderley. The Lord of House Peak at the time, Lord Lorrimar Peak, agreed to help King Persin on the condition that King Persian's heir, Prince Gawain Gardner, would marry Lord Peak's daughter, and that House Peak would be granted the castle of Dunstanbury when the war was won. After King Persian agreed to his demands, Lord Lorimer would lure the Manderleys into a war that the Manderleys eventually lost. House Manderley was not entirely destroyed in this conflict, but they were banished from the Reach with most of their belongings. The Manderleys were unable to find refuge in the south of Westeros, but they were welcomed to the north by the Kings of Winter. For centuries thereafter, the Gardner kings would rule the Reach until King Mern IX rode to face Aegon and his sister wives upon the Field of Fire. When the dragon had set out to conquer Westeros, King Mern had in response formed a grand alliance with King Lorien of the Rock, and together they sought to end the Targaryen conquest of Westeros. The arrogant and proud Mern IX marched to battle with all his male relatives, and this action turned out to be a grave mistake for House Gardner. For upon the Field of Fire, King Mern and all the other male Gardners were killed by dragonfire, which unfortunately marked the end of a house that had been instrumental in the cultural and economic growth of Westeros over a period of 8,000 years. After the Field of Fire, Aegon and his sister wives flew to Highgarden, but instead of resistance, they found the gates of the castle opened with the High Steward of Highgarden, Lord Harlan Tyrell, there to welcome them. For this gesture, Aegon the Conqueror granted Highgarden and the rule of the Reach to Lord Harlan Tyrell, and in so doing, Aegon the Dragon bypassed ancient houses that had historic ties to the extinguished house of the Gardners. Though House Tyrell would prove to be loyal to the Targaryens, and they even fought for them in the First Dornish War, the Tyrells generally held a cautious relationship with the Targaryens. During the Dance of the Dragons, the Tyrells stayed out of the fighting, and they would also stay out of King Aegon the Younger's reign. During the rule of Lord Leo Tyrell, House Tyrell fought for the Targaryens during the First Blackfyre Rebellion, and his descendants fought against the Blackfyres in later rebellions. During Robert's Rebellion, Lord Mace Tyrell fought for the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, and he even besieged Storm's End for a full year, though he was unable to subdue it. When the Targaryens were defeated, Lord Mace bent the knee to King Robert Baratheon. But unlike the Tyrells of old who had stayed out of the political affairs of House Targaryen, Lord Mace's family became intertwined with the political intrigues of King Robert's court. In this, Sir Loras Tyrell would develop a close relationship with King Robert's youngest brother, Lord Renly Baratheon, and this relationship led the Tyrells to side with King Renly during the War of the Five Kings. After King Renly was murdered, the Tyrells would then side with the Lannisters against King Stannis Baratheon. The alliance between the Tyrells and the Lannisters was further sealed by the marriage of King Joffrey Baratheon and Lady Margaery Tyrell, but Lady Olenna Tyrell, together with Lord Peter Baelish, orchestrated the murder of King Joffrey due to his cruelty and madness. After the death of King Joffrey, Queen Margaery would then marry King Tommen Baratheon, which maintained the position of the Tyrells of being the second most powerful house in Westeros. The later death of Lord Tywin Lannister helped the Tyrells to gain even more power in King's Landing, but the paranoia and misrule of the Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister, caused the imprisonment of Queen Margaery Tyrell. In current events, House Tyrell faces multiple challenges from all sides. As Queen Margaery has to stand trial for high treason, the Reach is beset by Ironborn Reavers for the first time since Garth the Golden Hand's reign, and the invasion of the false Aegon Targaryen in the Stormlands could either be a threat to the Tyrells or a new opportunity for them to grow stronger. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel.